Today I'm going to show you how to replace the O-rings on your SNOO. The first thing you want to do is use your wedge tool and remove these clips. All you're doing is just taking your wedge tool, sticking it underneath the back here, and just prying. This is probably a good time to also soak them in soap. So after that, the next thing you'll need to do is just take a Phillips screwdriver. This is a number 2 Phillips. And you'll want to remove these 6 screws here. So let's get those removed. You'll notice as you're removing these that there are some plastic pieces underneath. You can see that this one has been previously repaired and they were not replaced. The only thing that happens if you do happen to lose them is that it scuffs the paint a little bit. After you remove that last screw, sometimes the bracket can drop down below. So what you want to do in that case is just use your pick tool, stick it underneath the head of the screw, and it'll help you pop it out. Now onto the other side. So now that we have all these screws removed, what we'll do next is just lift up on this metal table. We remove this. So now that we have this metal cover removed, what we need to do is remove the netting all around the edges. And all you need to do here is just pull up on the netting. Okay, so now that we have the netting removed, what we'll need to do is remove these zip ties. There are 3 zip ties, all right here. To remove the zip ties, what I like to use a pair of flush cutters. You can also use a pointed pair of pliers, a pointed pair of scissors, or if you're careful enough, you could even use a razor blade. But be careful not to cut the wires if you do that. So when removing the zip ties, what I like to do is actually cut the large head of the zip tie right down the middle of it. That way I don't have to get too close to the wires, and it kind of just comes apart by itself. So now that we have the zip ties removed, what we'll need to do next is disconnect the speaker connector and also the 2 safety clip sensor wires. When removing the safety clip sensor wires, it can be helpful again to use your pick tool and use the corner of it just to kind of push your wires underneath that wire holder. Or you can also use the pointed end, and also be careful not to hit the wires, to kind of pry up on that bracket just ever so lightly. That way your wires can come out. So I like to go, the wires are here. I like to use the pick tool on this edge. I can show you this way. Just on the bracket, not on the wires. Kind of lifts it up just a bit so that it's not tangling with the wires. You want to be careful here. Okay, those are out. So to disconnect these, we'll just pull them apart. So this wiring connector here is definitely one of the newer models. This unit here specifically is a 2020. On the earlier models, they had these wires with this connector, and as you can see, it looks kind of frail. So these wires are soldered onto the connector here, and over time it can just break loose, and as you're removing it, it can actually break this connection. And if that happens, what is needed is a new wiring kit, and it is a bit intensive to replace, but they are available. So if this wire does get broken on you, what will happen is when you put the unit back together, you'll get an error saying that the safety clips are not engaged, even though they are, and oftentimes it's with this connector. So I do sell also an upgrade kit, which is this new connector that has protected connections on it so that this is not a weak point anymore. This is similar with the design of the new units. As you can see, the connector did change slightly on the newer units compared to the older ones. But once you upgrade to this, you shouldn't need to ever touch it again. So now that we have our zip ties removed and our clips disconnected, the next thing we'll need to do is remove the entire base plate here. So there are two variations of this center pin. This pin specifically shows that it's a newer model. This is around the 2018 time frame where this was introduced. And all it is this piece. And what you're doing is pushing down with a screwdriver. You definitely want a larger screwdriver, by the way, so you don't strip this out. You're pushing down with the screwdriver and then rotating 90 degrees. So when it's installed, the dot is with the I, and then you turn it towards the O. So typically a standard Phillips screwdriver is a number 2, such as this one. If you're able to find a Phillips number 3 or a large flathead, that usually works the easiest. So again, as what you want to do, in this case I am using a Phillips number 2 for demonstration purposes. And all you're doing is putting it in there, pushing down, and turning. And the reason why you need to push down hard is because there is a gasket here. So you're trying to squish that gasket like that. So don't worry about overdoing it with the pressure down, because once you push down enough, you'll be able to feel it turn. So now that we have that removed, what we will need to do is lift up on the table. There are 4 holes here that are perfect to stick your finger in and pull the table out. And as you're pulling it out, you want to guide your wires through the hole behind this foam. These 2 wires can stay behind. These are part of your safety clips, so you can leave those exposed. So we'll push those through. So again, the 2 safety clip wires are pushed through here, and then also the speaker wire is pushed through this hole. So we're pushing through 3 total wires. So now we'll remove that table. And this is where the action is. So if you have a newer SNOO with this piece, I have good news for you. The bearings that are all around the table, there's 7 of them in total, removed from the top. But if you have a unit, an older style unit, with the screw in the center, then these bearings, the large bearings, have to be replaced from underneath the table. I'll get to that in a minute on how to replace those, but for now we'll go with the process for the newer units. So now that we have the table removed, you'll be able to see your large bearings. There's 7 of them in total, and then also your motor O-rings are over here. The first thing I typically do is check to make sure that the motor does not need the bearings replaced or the motor replaced completely. So what you want to do is just spin this by hand, and you want to make sure it's smooth and it's consistently the same resistance. So typically when these bearings go bad, what happens is that there's kind of a rough spot in the bearings. So using this motor as an example, you can see that one of the O-rings deteriorated. It got all up in the motor. And then what happens is the O-ring dust actually gets into the bearings and ruins them. So that's why you don't want this problem to continue for too long with these bad O-rings. You want to get on top of it and replace them as soon as you can. So when you take it apart, and again, this is just as an example, you can see on this old motor that the shaft actually slides left and right and up and down. If these bearings were good, this would not move at all. And then also when you see I spin it, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's a little bit of squealing. And you definitely don't want that. So that's something you definitely want to check now, because if you put this back together with your new O-rings, it either one will not last long, or two will just have issues right away. So as you can see here, another issue with this motor was that the motor O-rings became loose and just spin on the shaft. So the reason this typically happens is because it heats up and expands and does not contract to its original size. That's why it's very important to use the correct materials when replacing these O-rings. The best material to use for these O-rings is Peroxide-cured EPDM, which is what comes with the SNOOs E-Fix kit. Alternatively, EPDM, sulfur-cured, I would say is second best. And beyond that, a lot of times these are Buna or NBR, or typically just rubber O-rings. And that's where this can happen. And as you can see, again, with this type of rubber, it deteriorates, gets in your motor, and also in your bearings, and it does not lead to good things. So here's an example of a brand new motor with perfect O-rings. There are 3 of them stacked. It spins with the shaft. And then also the bearings are perfect. So if you push up, down, left, or right, it moves in line with the motor and has no play. So the next step is to remove all of the large bearings out of the table. So a tool I like to use here is the hook from the pick set. And all you'll do is take the point of the hook, put it on the edge of the bearing, and remove it. Make sure not to press into the bearing too much. You just want to kind of catch on the lip of the bearing on the edge, just to get it to slide up. So as a reminder, if you have the older SNOO that had the screw in the center instead of that locking pin, these bearings will need to be removed from the underside. So in order to do that, what you need to do is use a 7mm socket. And there are these 6 bolts. 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And on the underside, you'll need a 4mm Allen key, which is included with the SNOOs E-Fix kit. Here's what that bolt looks like. It's a 7mm nut on one side, and then you need a 4mm Allen or hex key on the other end, which is on the bottom of the SNOO. Once you have all 6 of those bolts removed, this entire table will lift up, and watch, there are a few wires underneath here that you'll need to look out for. So when you do that, you'll just want to tilt the table up and hinge it by where the motherboard is, the green board underneath here, and tilt it up. So here's an example of what the older units look like. The other side looks exactly the same, except you can't pull the bearings from above. So once you have this removed, as you can see, there's still 7 bearings. You'll just need to use a Phillips screwdriver to remove the bracket holding it in. And then you can just pull that out. As you can see, this one has some grit on it, and you'll probably want to clean these a little bit. And then once you remove the O-ring, replace it, you just stick it back in there, put your bracket back in. There's 2 sides. One has a hex indent and the other is a circle. So make sure the circle end is up. Then we'll put our 2 screws back in there. And tighten it back up. So now we're going to continue removing all the large bearings with the pick tool. Okay, so now that we have all the bearings removed, this process is pretty simple. You'll just pull the old O-ring off if it's still there. A lot of times they break. And once that's off, you'll take your new one and just slip it into the groove on the bearing. You may need to clean the bearing before replacing it, as the old ones did deteriorate. So once you replace your first bearing, you'll continue around the edge and replace the other 6. And put them back in. So the next piece we'll work on is the motor. So typically when I replace the motor bearings, what I like to do is use a pick tool and actually just pick the old O-rings off. So once this is off, you'll make sure you want to clean the motor up. You can either use a vacuum cleaner, but be careful around the green board. You don't want static electricity to build up. Or if you have compressed air, like for a keyboard, that will also work. So once you have your motor all cleaned up, you want to install the new ones. The best way to do this is to stick the O-ring kind of straight up or at an angle and just wrap the O-ring around the motor. So once the first one's on, you want to push that down to the bottom as much as you can. As you can see, it goes about 2/3 of the way. It is a tight fit, which is definitely what you want. And then you'll want to put your second one on. Push down again. As you can see, there's a little bit of room in there for a third one. So we'll wrap our third one on there. And there you go. All 3 new O-rings are installed. Again, you'll do this while the motor is still installed, as long as you don't need new bearings or a motor replacement, but I just wanted to show you with it removed for demonstration purposes. So newer versions of the SNOO include this washer that prevents O-ring dust from getting into the bearings. As part of the newer kits that I offer, I am now including this washer. So if you did not have one before, you'll definitely want to install one. Or if you have one now that got a little bit dirty, you can replace it. So if you did have one previously, you'll just use your pick tool again. There's a little slit in it, a cut, that you'll use your pick tool to just remove it out. And then to install the new one, you can just slip it around the motor shaft. With the new O-ring material, these should last quite a bit longer than the original rubber, but still, it is good to put that on there as a preventative measure. So now that our motor O-rings have also been replaced, we've replaced all 10 O-rings that are needed. So the next process is to put everything back together. So the next step of the assembly process will include using these 2 alignment rods. What you want to do is stick these 2 alignment rods through the centering hole in the frame, just like this. And just to kind of show you visualization, the alignment rod goes through the brown bracket, and then once it's through the brown bracket, the alignment rod goes through this centering hole. Get that set up. So now that they're somewhat aligned, I'm going to actually remove these for now. It's just the initial alignment later, it's kind of a little bit harder if they aren't in the somewhat correct area. So the next process is we want to take the table and the speaker always goes towards where the safety warning is on the outside of the mesh. Or another way to look at it is this side always goes where the motor is, because this is what the motor rubs against. So we'll put this back in here. And what I like to do is angle it up on the side where there's two wires, because those two wires have to go through the foam holes. So these two holes. This can be kind of challenging. So once those wires are through, what you want to do is kind of lift up on the table a little bit. Just make sure that nothing is pinching these wires. So then again, you'll want to use the 4 holes and just align the table and push down. So the next step is we'll want to use our locking pin, push it down, and then push down hard and turn 90 degrees. So once we have our locking pin reinstalled, we'll want to reconnect all of our wires. So first, I'm going to reconnect the speaker wire. And then the 2 safety clip sensor wires. And then we will need to install them back underneath this bracket that holds them in. And again, the pick tool can be helpful with that process. Just make sure, again, don't puncture the wires. We have 1 wire in. Now we got to get the second one underneath that holder. There we go. Okay, both wires have been reinstalled. Let's put this wiring inside the foam. So typically at this step, what I would tell you to do is test out the unit before you put everything back together and put the zip ties back in. So what I like to do is just take a zip tie and just stick it in where the safety clips go. And that kind of will override the system. Otherwise, you can put the SNOO sack in there as well and then test it out. So once you've tested it out and make sure that everything's working again, we're ready to put everything back together. Again, I would highly recommend testing it out, especially on the older units with the safety clip sensor issues where these wires go bad. But now that we know that everything is working, we'll go ahead and put our zip ties in. What I like to do is kind of just roll the edge of the zip tie, so that way when we stick it into the brackets down here, it goes in easy. Okay, there's one. Again, I like to roll it. Okay, perfect. So now we have our 3 zip ties installed. Now you want to take your razor blade, scissors, or in this case, flush cutters, and just trim those zip ties. So the next step is putting the metal cover back on, and in this case, the holes for the speaker align with the speaker. You put that in there. And next, we will want to put the mesh back in. Sometimes the mesh can be a little finicky. What I like to use first is the wedge tool, and actually go on the edge of the mesh. So if you can see here, the mesh has this plastic lining. And what I typically do is I'll stick the wedge tool next to the bracket just to push the mesh below the bracket. Just next to it. Because the issue is if you go directly on top of the bracket, it might overexpand it, and it's just harder for the mesh to fit through. So the edge usually is the best. And it's making sure that you go on both sides, left and right of the bracket, to make sure that the mesh is fully seated. Okay, now that the mesh is all installed, we'll need to take our 2 alignment rods again and stick them through the center screw. And then rotate the table until you feel it go through the brown bracket. And then once it's through the brown bracket, keep rotating until you feel it drop into that center indentation again. So we'll stick it over here. And actually we'll want to remove this one, so that way we can, again, rotate the table until it centers. This one is centered, and this one will drop back in, and they're both centered. So then I'll take some screws, put them in, and start tightening them. Okay, so now that we have our first screw installed, we can remove the centering pins. Then we'll put our screws in there, and then finish tightening these down. Make sure you don't over tighten these, otherwise that nut inside the brown bracket can actually start spinning, and the next time this needs to be taken apart, it'll be very tough to get apart. Okay, now the last step of reassembly is putting the mesh clip covers on. The thinner end points towards the outside. So all you'll need to do is put it on top and just push down hard. If you're having issues installing any, make sure that your mesh is completely down and it's below the bracket. And then also you want to check and make sure that these 2 retaining clips are in there. If they're broken or dislodged at all, that's okay. You can remove the broken piece and then still install it, as the other one will hold it in. Sometimes it can be a little tough to install. So what I like to do in that case is use the pick tool and kind of just guide the 2 clips together. So as an example, what happens when these are installed is that this angled clip goes into the ridge of this cover. So typically I'll take the pick tool and I'll push in just a little bit as I'm installing this. So you'll go through here and push outwards on this piece. So I just put in the front one as an example. And then I just ever so lightly just push, and then it goes in. Okay, everything's installed. So now that your snoozy fix is completed, you're all good to go. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to us. Check us out on snoozyfix.com. Thank you.